am so excited to be here. This is Dana Brownlee, and I'm here with my girl, Karen Ceesay. Hey, Karen.
Hello.
All right, we got to hear you.
Oh, can you
So
not hear me?
yeah, well, the second before you said something.
Okay.
All right, I am just scrolling through some of your comments. Let us know where you are joining from. I know we've got people all over the world, and I want to shout you out. So let us know in the comments where you are joining from. I'm just so thrilled. I'm just so amazed and overwhelmed by the response to this topic. And, I wish I could take credit, but I know y'all aren't here for me. Y'all are here for a fulsome, honest, candid conversation around workplace microaggressions. And so that's what we're going to deliver. And so I'm really, oh my gosh, look at all these people. Whales, they're coming in so fast. I can't even click on them. There's so many. Oh my gosh.
I see Florida in the house. Woo,
They're coming in so quick. I literally can't even click on them. Oh my gosh, everywhere. Thank you guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm clicking on as many as I can. But let me just keep it rolling. Let me just kind of give you our run of show. We're going to introduce ourselves, and then I want to backtrack a little bit. And for those of you who weren't here for part one, I want to just define, what do we mean by microaggressions? What are they? Just give you a couple examples. But then I want to spend the bulk of our time talking about, okay, what do I do? I don't want to be a deer in headlights. What if it's my boss? What if it wasn't directed to me, but it's directed to a coworker? I want to be a strong ally. That's where we really want to give you guys very practical techniques, things that you can do in the moment. And I also want to be sure to convey the message that you don't want to be too hard on yourself. This is hard stuff. There's no perfect answer. There's not necessarily one way to do it. In fact, one of the things that I want to do with you guys today, if we have time, is I want to share two specific examples of microaggressions directed towards me fairly recently. And I want to talk about those, not so much to talk about the microaggression, but also to talk about how I handled it. Because when I look back on it, I probably give myself about a B. I don't think I handled it perfectly, but I'll talk to you about what I did. And, I want to hear from you what you guys think. And that's kind of the honest conversation that I want us to have. I want you to, I don't want you to put too much pressure on yourself. I want you to realize this is hard stuff, but just because it's hard, it doesn't mean that we can't lean into it and try to promote and build anti-racist workplaces. So with that, let me just do a quick intro. I am Dana Brownlee. For those of you who don't know me, I've been a corporate trainer, speaker, writer for nearly 20 years now. My company is Professionalism Matters. And before that, I worked in corporate in a range of positions. If you want to keep in touch with me, if you want to hear what I have to say on the topic of workplace anti-racism, please follow me on my Forbes page. I'm a Forbes career senior contributor, and I'm frequently writing on the topic of workplace anti-racism. So I'd love to stay connected with you that way. Also, I'm a LinkedIn Learning instructor. I have 3 courses with LinkedIn Learning. 2 of them are specifically focused on anti-racism. One, how to speak up against racism at work. That's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So if you want to dive deeper and you want to get more practical techniques, please check out that course. The other one is supporting allyship and anti-racism at work. If you're newer to the concept of anti-racism, or maybe you're not new, but you really want to figure out, okay, how can I make a real impact in my workplace? Check that course out. We've got a lot of great stuff for you there. So with that, I want to have Karen introduce herself. I know Karen well. I've known her for decades. Where's that Spelman fan, Karen? Or should I say Beyonce today? I was a little confused.
Well, it's birthday hair. Leah.
That's right. It's Karen's birthday.
Wait a minute.
It was
Look, I'm backwards.
on Sunday. Give Karen a happy birthday in the chat. Tell Karen happy birthday. But Karen, just share a little bit more about you. Karen was my first roommate at Spelman. And so one of the things I've done with this series, for those of you who aren't familiar, I could bring on academics and DEI consultants, and those are important people doing important work. But personally, what I think we need is I think we need to have that real, raw, honest conversation, the type of conversation that you're having with your girlfriend when you leave the meeting and you're hot and you're telling them how you really feel. I think we need to get brave enough to have that level conversation in a more public setting. And so over this series, what I've done is I've specifically focused on talking to my friends, my family, my husband, my parents. I mean, I'm keeping it really, really real. I really want to discuss the undiscussables. So with that, Karen, and Karen is an actress. So Karen, please share a little bit more about your background and let them know where they may have seen you in film or on television.
Well, I am an actress and writer and live in Atlanta. Well, we've got The Walking Dead coming back this Sunday. I've been on The Walking Dead for 6 seasons. I've been alive.
Anybody watch Walking Dead?
A few people. I'm sure a few of them out there are Walking Dead fans, but I'm Birdie of the Hilltop. I'm kind of not as much as before, but still alive, which is something to say.
But you're not dead. That's what's important.
I am not dead. I am not dead. I made it to the final season. And I'm also Mrs. Sinclair, Lucas and Erica's mom on Stranger Things. So that makes me popular with the kids, right?
And that's,
yeah,
that's always a good thing.
Been doing a lot of things, and it's kind of cool to have these conversations because even though I've worked corporate and worked in different environments, now the microaggressions that I suffer from are a little bit different because I'm not in a corporate environment. I'm not, we're in places where we can curse and kind of tell someone, oh, look, well, what you say, so a lot of times my approach is a little bit more baseline than corporate clean. Right?
But Karen almost got arrested at work. So that's the key of all microaggressions. If we have time, we'll stay to the end. I'm going to ask Karen
minding my business in my car.
How she almost got arrested at work, okay? And it absolutely was race related. So we'll circle back to that. So again, I want to use your time well. I consider it a huge honor that so many of you have shown up for this. And so I really take that seriously. So I really want to use this time well. So with that, let's begin at the beginning. First, if you didn't join us last time, I want to just share a brief definition. For those of you who are not familiar with the concept of microaggressions, I defined them before as brief, subtle slights or indignities, whether intentional or unintentional. That is so important, okay? Whether intentional or unintentional, that marginalize others, okay? And we're going to come back to that concept of intent versus impact. Previously, we gave a few examples. One classic example is, a Black person sits down from a presentation and somebody next to them says, oh, wow, you sound really articulate. Oh, wow, that was very, very articulate. Because again, there's a thought bubble. The thought bubble is for a Black person, or this is not what I expected. One of the questions that we got last time, which I really appreciated, was somebody saying, well, is it okay to tell a Black person they did a great job? Absolutely. Nobody's saying that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with
no
that.
Modifiers.
There's no thought bubble there. That's something you would say to anybody. An analogy that I would draw is, I'm thinking about my husband's grandfather died fairly recently, and he was almost 100. And so we would say to him frequently, gosh, Grandpa Jess, you're doing a great job. You live by yourself, you dress yourself, you make your own food. But he's 100, okay? I wouldn't say that same thing. If I said that to somebody who was 40, I would sound crazy, okay? Because the thought bubble that's there is I'm not expecting you to be able to take care of yourself, to dress yourself, etc. And so we can obviously feel that. We feel the diminished expectation. One other example that I thought about since last time was I used to teach, because my background is math and industrial engineering. I went to Spelman and then Georgia Tech, and then I did a business degree at Emory. And so I used to teach for a second in a Six Sigma program. And so in the Six Sigma program, I taught this section that related to quality assurance, and there was a lot of statistics. And so one time I was doing a session, and at the end of the session, I sat down And this white guy who was also an instructor, he said to me like, "Wow, you really understand statistics. Like you really know this stuff." And I'm like, "Yeah, I have an engineering degree from Georgia Tech. Like it's not a certificate of participation." So, those are the types of things we're talking about. And one of the litmus tests, because I do understand why it can be difficult if you're not as familiar or if you're not on the receiving end of these sorts of things, is ask yourself, would I have said the same thing in the same way to a white male? Would I have said the same thing in the same way to a white male? A lot of times, I think that can give you a sense of whether it falls into the territory of microaggression. Anything, Karen, you want to share about, maybe one of the ones you shared last time, or anything else, just kind of on that topic of defining what microaggressions kind of sound like, or how they show up in the workplace, or why they're a problem?
Well, the main thing is the word micro. You know what I mean? They're tiny little things. You can, relate it to death by 1,000 cuts. You know what I mean? Like it's not just getting stabbed, it's having little pieces of you just sliced off little by little. And usually the person who is being offended has to not only bear the brunt of the pain, but have to recover and then act as if everything is fine. Um, for fear of being further, marginalized. Angry black woman, or you know what I mean, temperamental or emotional woman, those types of things. So it's a double-edged sword a lot of times in trying to be the person who is being offended and the one trying to fix the problem. And yet what we're calling for is we need help, we need support in fixing the problem,
And let me also say, I think one of the reasons why it's tricky is because, yeah, they are micro and they feel slight. And in some cases, you may want to ignore it. I love that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, she famously was asked, what's her marital advice? And she said, it helps to be a little deaf. And, in the workplace, sometimes that makes sense. If this is the first or the only time, or, you want to cut them some slack, or, maybe you're just not sure. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. Yes, it can be micro, and sometimes maybe it makes sense to be a little deaf, or to look the other way, or certainly not make a big deal about it. The problem is when it becomes a pattern, or when it starts to create an image, or it starts to impact how you are viewed in the organization. I've heard analogies used many, many times. People say things like, imagine getting one mosquito bite, but then imagine getting 1,000 mosquito bites. Like if you're getting
every day,
if that's happening to you, or think about your kids. We're so protective of our kids. If you send your kid to school and somebody says something that maybe isn't so nice, you tell them, I tell my kids all the time, well, maybe they're having a bad day, find somebody else to talk to. But if your kid is hearing that day in and day out, every single day, now that becomes bullying. Okay, now and it's impacting them. It's impacting their mental health, their emotional health. It might impact how they view themselves. It might impact how other people view them. So
and how they work toward goals. You know what I mean? Like when you think that no one's listening to you, or someone has a thing, then you don't speak up as much. Then you don't try as hard because you're fearful that you'll be judged negatively. So it affects us in the moment, and then it affects you long term in how your behavior how you handle your behavior from that point on.
That's a big one. That's a big one, because one of the topics that came up in the comments was tone policing. And for many of us, I would say Black females in particular, we're in a no-win situation. Because let's say people, make these ridiculous comments or offensive comments. Now we're in a situation of, okay, if we react with firmness and clarity, we're perceived as being too aggressive. And so now we play into another stereotype.
Right.
And so it really can be a no-win situation. And I think this is one of the reasons why there's so many people on the call today, because we need help. We need ways to try to address this behavior.
But so I do. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on then.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, we do need to understand that each of us is a combination of all of the programming that we've been receiving since we came out the womb. You know what I mean? Like And that could be race, it could be gender, it could be sexual identity. Well, maybe not from the womb, but you know what I mean. But where you live, if you're in New York versus the South, or if you're, you know, you're overseas and you grow up in America versus growing up somewhere in Europe, in Africa, um, in Asia, you know, it's all different things that come down to this is how we perceive what this means. And that is where we have to break down, is breaking down who you are and what you are already bringing to the table and how you perceive situations and behaviors.
This stuff is so deep. I mean, it's really, really deep. So let me do two things. I want to pivot now, and I want to move to what are some real practical techniques that we all can use, some strategies to try to address microaggressions. And then, Karen, I know this is one of your important points about the perspective,
Mm-hmm.
about you want to share just a little bit about that?
Well, when we talk about going into how do you handle this situation, you have to understand there's three different places that you would be coming from. One, you are the offender. You are the person who did the microaggression, whether you know it or not. You are the one who did the offense. There's the person who is being offended, who has had the microaggression cast upon them. And then many times there is the bystander, the person who is there and sees it, but doesn't know exactly when they should jump in, when they need to pull somebody to the side, and exactly how to do this while themselves keeping their jobs and maintaining positive relationships. You know, so
Right.
those are like three different ways that you're coming at it.
Sure. And that's why I want us all to recognize that we all have a role. You all have a role, whether you're the observer, whether you're the offended party, or you know, whether you're the offender. So everybody has a role. So two things I want to do. I'm going to go to this PDF that I posted in the comments, and I'm going to actually post it again here if I can figure out how to do that. And while I'm bringing that up, okay, so this is the PDF. You guys are great with the Googler, so I'm sure you can figure out how to get to that if you don't have it handy. This is something that I found online from Diane Goodman. I reached out to her and let her know that I was going to be sharing this with you guys today. But we all want like a cheat sheet, don't we? We all want like, give me a list of
Make it
techniques.
easy. Just give me some
Exactly.
bullet
Give
points.
me. So this is 2 pages of how to respond to microaggressions. If you're having problems finding that URL, just Google how to respond to microaggressions. And the for me, it was the third one that came up. It was the first one after the sponsored responses. But as I go into that, before I go into that, I really want to make this super, super important point. First, let me step back and say, my perspective in terms of how I speak to these issues and how I speak to all issues is that I don't have all the answers and I'm not perfect. I'm still learning. So I never come at it from the perspective of, well, this is what you need to do. Okay. I offer a perspective, an informed perspective, albeit in my experience, but you know your situation. Okay, you know your boss, you know your bills, you know your environment, you know what support you have, what support you don't have, you know your personality. Those are all things that come into play because my perspective is you have to take microaggressions on a case by case basis. There's not a one size fits all solution. If there were, I would have just posted that and we could have saved ourselves an hour. Okay, I would say, hey, do this the next time you hear a microaggression. There isn't. You have to consider the context, you have to consider the situation, you have to consider, is this a one-off or is this a pattern? Is this someone that I'm going to be working with regularly, or is this a person I'll never see again for the rest of my life? How important is it? How offended do I feel? There are lots of different things to consider. So I really, really want everyone to understand and to give yourself the authority to say that I have the right to handle each situation in a way that feels right for me. And one of the reasons why and I'm going to come to you in a second, Karen, one of the reasons why I really want to double down on that is because I've seen a lot of stuff out there on social media, and I've seen people say, you've got to call it in the moment. You've got to say it in the moment. And I don't disagree with that depending on the situation. And I understand why people are calling for that, because too often what we have is performative allyship, where they want to agree with us after the meeting's over. They want to support us when nobody's around. And that's the kind of support we don't need. Okay. We need active allyship. If you have a problem with it, or if you're going to give support, go ahead and give them public support to the extent that you can. But having said that, on the other hand, when I look back on a lot of my situations, if I had just gone off in the moment, I might have needed to have some bail money ready. That would have been a career limiting move, or it just would have been the wrong thing for me to do. When I look back on it, I'm glad in certain situations that I took 10. I'm glad that I took a moment to go back to my office and to cool down. Or I grabbed one of my girlfriends and said, hey, I need to walk around the block. I need to talk to you about something. Or maybe I gathered some additional information. So I feel it's unwise to say to people that you absolutely have to say something in the moment every single time. And the other, just really quick, before I go to you, Karen, is I also am very protective of my mental health and my energy. It takes a lot of energy to address a lot of these issues. And guess what? Everyone does not deserve my energy and my attention. If I jumped to 10 every single time I read something crazy or something offensive on social media, I would have like 3 hairs on my head and be on medication. So for me, I have to be very judicious about deciding where I'm going to apply my energy and my attention to ensure, because it's all about ROI. I want to ensure it's really worth it for me to go in. And even if I do, it's how far do you want to go in, or how much energy do you want to put towards it? Karen, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was going to say it's kind of like when you're driving on the highway. Now, here in Atlanta, we have a traffic situation, and you got all types of rude drivers. Some people that might just cut you off. Some people that might do some. Sometimes they do it on purpose. Sometimes they do it by accident because they didn't notice you. How you choose to respond in your car is up to you. Sometimes you might just let the person go and it's fine. Other times I might be like, no, I'm not letting you over. I've been waiting in this line for forever. Other times, the Philly girl in me might come out. But nowadays, I don't know what kind of response I'm going to get to my response nowadays. So it's a constant thing of every car, every situation is kind of a different response. But ultimately, what Dana is saying, what is going to make me feel the safest? What ultimately is going to put me in the best situation? And that's what I have to do. How I respond now at 51 is different than how I responded at 21. So a lot of these things come into where everyone has personal ways that they want to deal with things, or the way that they want things dealt with. So we might be telling you something, but Sheila at work might be like, don't be speaking up for me. You know what I mean? And so you've got to know where you are and how deep is the situation.
I was just going to say, that's a great example. You might be the observer and observe something, but depending upon your relationship or lack of relationship with that other person, you might want to check in with them before you launch in. Okay. So again, I just want you guys to give yourself some grace. I want you to give yourself some grace and realize we've all got to protect our mental health. We've all got to protect our energy, but that's not an excuse for not doing anything. That's not an excuse for always stepping back. Okay. So I want you to be active. I want you to say something. I want you to do something, but I just also want you to realize it may look and feel different depending upon the person, depending upon the situation, and that's perfectly okay. So with that, I know I'm throwing these comments up here, but they're just scrolling by so fast.
They're going by so fast. There was one I was trying to read and then it was gone. I was like,
I know. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to read.
I'm sorry. Let me launch into this. We're gonna have another session on the same topic. So on the PDF, great examples here. I just want to highlight a few that really jumped out to me. This first one, well, it's actually the second one on the list, but it's the first one I highlighted. Ask for clarification or more information. One of the phrases I love is conversation crutches. And the great thing about something like this is, even though this is kind of hard, tricky stuff, the more you practice it and the more you come up with your own set phrases and conversation crutches that make you that you feel comfortable with, the easier this is going to get. And so this one, it's asking, amazing technique. I've been a facilitator and I've taught facilitation for 30 years now. And asking is so powerful, particularly if maybe you don't want to be as assertive. You're a little concerned. Maybe it's, your boss or whomever, it's a difficult, tricky situation. Asking is always less threatening. So if they say something that you feel is kind of offensive or just kind of, takes you aback, you might just kind of lean in and get curious, say, oh, I'm not exactly sure what you meant by that. Can you explain more? Can you tell me more about that? Because oftentimes that does two things. Oftentimes what that does is it kind of allows them to see why it's problematic. So it's like you're kind of leading them.
Give them the rope to hang themselves.
Exactly. Like, oh, well, what did you mean by that? I know that you said this, but what did you mean when you said, somebody put in there that her daughter, somebody said her daughter sent a resume in, and the person said, I couldn't even tell you were Black by your resume. Like, what? I was confused by that comment. You couldn't tell I was Black. What exactly does that mean? So
for a Black person specifically,
right? So I love, love, love. Tell me more. Can you explain more? I'm a little confused about that. So I absolutely love that. Something that's kind of close to that on the back, she's got pretend you don't understand. As people try to explain their comments, they often realize how silly they sound. So it's the same sort of thing. I don't get that. Or, it's an off-color joke. Well, why is that funny? I didn't quite get that. So you're going to just ask the question and you let them keep going with it. And then she's got on here, use humor. I love this. Exaggerate the comment or use general sarcasm. So let's say somebody said something like, she plays like a girl. And so you might say, oh, well, you mean she plays like Naomi Osaka or Serena Williams or Mia Hamm? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. So it's like you're making your comment in a funny way. And so I love, love, love those techniques. Anything on that, Karen, before I go to a couple more?
Well, that's the fun thing, because I'm a comedian, so I love to use humor. And that has been my best things, whether it's racial, sexual, like when back in the day when, you get called out or whatever, and guys be like, oh, girl, your butt look good in that. And it's like, oh, do you think I look nice in this dress? Thank you very much, or twist it to where you take their words and repeat them back to them a lot of times. Yeah. Like I'll take someone's words and repeat them back to them as a question or something like that, and humor really is, you've got to have a sense of humor within yourself, because it will, Dave Chappelle, classic example, he will be knocking out some really hard, complex subject matter and just right through. And if you're cracking up about it, it's not that big of a deal. Again, microaggressions require micro responses. You know,
or sometimes sometimes you can go, sometimes a macro. It depends on the situation.
It depends on the situation.
If this is the 10th time, then that might be different. So this person said, I usually smile and say, why do you ask? I love that. So come up with a few of those set phrases, questions, because that's just a subtle, easier way to check it, because then they start thinking about it. And I love what you said, Karen, maybe repeat back what they said, because oftentimes when you repeat it back, now they start hearing it, and did I say, well, I didn't mean that. And then of course they start
and let's stop right there. If you are the person that said something and someone asked for clarification, and in the moment you hear that it sounds ridiculous, you can very, very easily be like, ooh, that doesn't sound too great. What I really meant was this. I apologize if it came across this way or something. Because a lot of times I find that, especially like with my white friends and everything, there's this immediate like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. And it becomes so defensive that now we can't deal with it. Now we've made it a much bigger issue than it really was. So the minute you accept responsibility and, oh, I'm just so sorry, can we move on? You know what I mean? Now I know you've accepted it. Everybody in the room knows that there was an issue. And now we know that Sheila doesn't have a problem with it anymore because Sheila's been acknowledged. Her feelings have been acknowledged. And now we can move on. So it doesn't have to be a big response.
Yeah. Right. And that's why I want you guys to have a bag of tools, because, you know, there's sometimes when you pull out a hammer, but then there's sometimes when, you know, you pull out a nail file. I mean, you need different tools, different levels of assertiveness. So that's why I want you guys to have a whole cadre of tools and techniques at your disposal. I saw one comment that related to disability, and I love that. And I really wanted to make that point. We're focusing in on racial microaggressions, but microaggressions can happen for lots of, or be targeted to lots of marginalized communities. Well, whether it's LGBTQ, disability, gender, just lots
single
of
moms,
different,
weight.
yeah, exactly. Ageism.
Ageism is big, you know, with
Lots of
millennials
different
taking
things.
over now. I saw someone talk about they were a millennial and were dealing with certain things. But and once again, since everyone is someone's marginalized community, you need to be able to understand that it's not always about race. And just because you're a Black person doesn't mean that you can't still be discriminatory against someone else. So we want us to always acknowledge how
That's
it
very
feels
true.
when you are the one being marginalized and show empathy to other groups, because people can do it through religion. There's so many different ways that people do things and don't realize it. And then Black people a lot of times feel like, oh, well, I'm always discriminated against, so what? Well, no one should be marginalized against. No one. So it's the same tools. It's just we focusing on race right now because a lot of times that's
Exactly.
kind of the most prevalent. But as our
And also we're
workplaces become more
focusing,
diversified, so do
yeah,
the issues.
and not even just race. You're going to hear me a lot of times use the word Black, and that's intentional because I'm speaking from my own personal experience. You know, I can't speak to other people's experiences, but that's not to minimize them. I mean, there are lots of different racial groups, but there are lots of different areas of microaggressions. I just want to give a shout out to David. He's saying he has a lot to learn. This is eye
I was just
opening.
about
Thank
to
you for
call
being
out David too.
transparent. So I really, that's what we want. That, you know,
But
that's
we
why
don't
this
want
is so valuable.
but we don't want you to feel guilty because you don't know. See, that's the thing. And that was one of the points that when Dana and I were talking offline, it's not about how you're feeling. Like your feelings should spur the action. But when you are handling these situations, it can't be about you assuaging your guilt or feeling like you're a good person. The focus always needs to be on the person that is being offended and how we are solving that problem, and not, oh, I feel bad. So it is great to acknowledge things, but don't get caught up in that. Get caught up in what are the solutions, and that's why we're here. Right?
That is a perfect segue. The next technique on the first page, number 4, separate intent from impact. And guys, if you didn't listen to me before, this is huge, particularly my non-melanated listeners. Okay. Separate intent from impact, because so often these conversations go left, or people of color or Black people in particular are so intimidated and feel like they can't say anything, because what happens is as soon as we do say something, the person gets so defensive and all the energy is focused on proving that they didn't intend anything and proving that they're a good person. So then instead of addressing the microaggression, now, because Karen, didn't you say this one time before? Like you get so frustrated, it's like you say something or they come to you, and then by the end of the conversation, you're ending up
I'm
consoling
the
them.
racist. I'm the racist. And they are a great person, and this is why they don't talk to people. Be like, well, this is why I don't talk to people about it. Right?
It's, you know, and so you've got to separate the intent from the impact. And let me give you, first I'm going to read what she says here, and then I want to give you a real example. So what she says is, this is the wording she suggests: I know you didn't realize this, but when you do blank, or when you did blank, it was hurtful or offensive because blank. Instead, you could do blank. So that's her recommendation, broadly. But let me just make it real. Let me give you a real example. Let's say this one is hypothetical, but certainly real. We could relate to it. So let's say I've been like the only, early in my career, I was like the only Black engineer, the only Black female engineer many times. And so let's say you have a boss who continuously, you're the only female, you're the only Black person or whatever. And for some reason, they seem to always ask you to take the meeting minutes, or they seem to always ask you to order the lunches, or when it's like some sort of administrative task, they ask you to get the coffee, they ask you to do something administrative. And so that to me is a really difficult situation, because you're going to feel like, hey, this is my boss, like how do I handle this? So this is where this recommendation about separating intent from impact, I think, is so useful. So let's say I do decide to say something to my boss. Oh, the PDF should be attributed to Diane Goodman. So somebody asked that, Diane Goodman. And I did reach out to her before, so she knows that we're sharing it. So let's say you're talking to your boss about that. And this is how I might word something along those lines. Jim, thank you so much for meeting with me. I really, really appreciate it. I don't want to take up a lot of time. I have something I, wanted to bring up, and honestly, it's not a huge issue. It's pretty minor from my perspective. But I know you're the type of boss that you want to stay in the loop. I know that if there's an impression being created that's negative, you would certainly want to know. And I really value our relationship. We have an amazing relationship. I would never want to do anything to undermine that. First off, let me just say, I absolutely know that you have no negative intention. I feel valued on this team. I'm hoping to, I know how strongly you support diversity and inclusion, but I don't think that you're aware of a perception that may be being created. When you tend to default to me to order the lunches, or to schedule the meeting rooms, or to perform other administrative tasks, I think that it can tend to diminish how I'm perceived on the team. In fact, when we had that meeting with the client last week, that new person who showed up, they actually thought I was the admin person. They didn't realize that I was one of the engineers. And so for me, because I'm Black, because I'm a female, I'm fighting this bias that a lot of people are going to have, where they might want to, it might be harder for them to see me as the leader, or to see me as the engineer. They might be predisposed to, try to put me in this administrative bucket. And so I'm constantly fighting that. And I just wanted to make you aware. And so with that, what we're doing is you just kind of lay it on thick in terms of, I know you didn't mean anything. I know that, you're not being offensive. I know that you're valuing everyone. You want to kind of go ahead and just get that stuff out of the way, so they don't feel as much of a need to double down on that. Because unfortunately, when you don't do that, so much of the energy is focused on, well, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean anything by that. You just want to say, I know you didn't mean it. Okay. I know you didn't mean it, but this is the impact that it's having. And I value our relationship enough that I want to share that with you. Thoughts?
Again, to use the car and driving reference, if you were driving and you sneezed, you accidentally hit somebody's car, like, they can relate that you didn't mean to. No one means to sneeze and hit a car.
Or if you got drunk.
What are we gonna do?
Drunk, right? If I get sloppy drunk and then I have an accident and I, kill a family, the fact that I didn't intend doesn't make them less dead.
Well, let's slightly do that, because drunk is an intention and you made that choice to be that way, right?
But I didn't intend to have the consequence. I didn't intend to cause harm. Yeah.
But if it's something where it's legit, like you drop something in your lap and you look down and then you hit something, of course you didn't mean to, but you still got to pay for that mailbox that you hit. You still have to, and it could not be as grave as death. It could just be, you knocked over my mailbox. You you know what I mean, busted up this. And it's just, okay, well, I didn't mean to. Okay, that's great. But my mailbox is still busted. The difference is when it's an emotional injury, you can't see it. You know what I mean? So that is where the difference is. But again, we don't intend to be offended. We intend to be marginalized. And yet, I gotta deal with it. So, and I had nothing, I just walked into it. So, you know, let's not focus on how you're feeling. Let's focus on what you're doing and how to stop doing that, or how to keep other people from doing that. If you're
and that's perfect segue in terms of keeping other people. Last two I'm going to share from this handout, and I'm leaving this up here for you guys who are still trying to find it. She makes these two suggestions, and I think these are more for allies. One, she calls share your process. And so you might say something like, hey, I noticed that you did X. I used to say and do that too, but then I learned this. So it's like you're kind of partnering with them. Say, hey, and of course, the level of relationship you have with someone has a huge impact on how you want to phrase things, what sort of technique you want to use. I mean, that just goes without saying. Another one that she has in here that I really like, this is stepping it up. It's a little bit more assertive. Is challenge the stereotype. And allies ask us this all the time. What can I do? Well, what can I do? I want to do so. This is what you can do. Okay. Challenge the stereotype. Give information or share your own experience that might be contrary to what's being said. So let me make it real. Let's say an example. Let's say an organization is saying, yeah, we have a few HBCU hires, but we don't have enough. We don't do enough recruiting. We do way more recruiting at predominantly white institutions. We're really thinking about stepping up our recruiting at historically Black colleges and universities. Now, somebody at that table is going to be thinking, well, what about quality? Aren't we taking a risk if we, start recruiting heavily at HBCU? So let's say somebody says something like that, which clearly is offensive, because it assumes that historically Black means historically less, or it means it's lower quality. So that's where you could use this technique, which is challenge the stereotype. Actually, in my experience, our HBCU hires have been some of our best performers. Actually, I've been very impressed with the quality of the candidates that we've seen with our HBCU partners. So it's stepping in real time to challenge that stereotype that's put out there. Any comments, thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely, because that is what's difficult, is the ally, the bystander. We've talked about the person that offends and the person that's being offended. The bystander, I'm in the meeting and I'm seeing this go down. I remember one time I went to a friend's baptism, right? And it was a Christian baptism. And at the church, they started saying things that me growing up in Philadelphia, it sounded very anti-Jewish to me.
Yeah.
And the people in the audience, the people in the congregation, it was just fine. But there were two Jewish people that I knew that were there, and I saw them react differently.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I saw them react to where I was like, wait a minute, what are they saying? I can't, in the middle of the congregation, excuse me, pastor, I can't do that. My friend, I can't embarrass everyone, which I'm
right.
No. So at the end, I have to go. This is where we're saying you don't want to be the person that goes after the fact. But in this situation, I can't say something out in the open.
No,
but I have to go to them and are you okay? I just heard that and I felt a certain kind of way just hearing it. So there's a difference with, again, you got to read the room. Now, if someone is in a meeting and it's like 10, 12 people, and there's a Black woman that is constantly being asked to take the notes or whatever, and you're in this meeting every week, and you be like, why are you always asking Dana to take the notes? And be like, that's when you in the moment go, I think if we all took times, maybe we should schedule the meetings to see that different people know that they're in charge of the meetings. I think, what do you all think? Or it's when someone is just out there hanging, fighting for themselves.
Exactly. And
it doesn't
take much. We've all been there. Haven't you guys all been in that room? It doesn't take much. But just if one person will step in and challenge or say something, steer it a little differently, then other people chime in and the whole energy and momentum shifts around. You reminded me of an example. I've forgotten about this. I was doing a training decades ago, and somebody in the room made a derogatory comment about unions. And now I'm standing up in front of the class, like 50 people in the room. And when they made that comment, I could tell, I could look and I could see on some of the faces that they offended some people in that room. Okay. But also I don't want to make that person feel, horrible. I don't want to have an overly confrontational event with them. And I'm in a different role. I'm a paid trainer. I've been brought in here to, speak to this group. But what I did, I knew I had to call it, and I knew I had to say something in the moment because I wanted that room to understand it was a safe place and we were not going to be stereotyping. So what I did was I said, Jeff, hold on one second. I just wanted to go back. I know you'd made that reference to unions before, and I know that you were not intending to stereotype. I know you weren't intending to offend anyone, but for me, it felt a little stereotypical. And I just want to be really clear that we're not stereotyping groups in this session. And of course, as soon as I said that, he was like, "Oh, no, I didn't mean that. I wasn't saying, I wasn't saying that."
We know.
But calling it, it's like you can give them grace. You can give them grace and you can assume the best intention in the world. But calling it is so powerful. And that is one of the benefits, certainly, of calling it in the moment. Because again, if I try to come back 2 weeks later and say, "Remember
I don't know what you're talking about. What are
ago,
you talking about?
yeah, when you were," and then
talking about?
and honestly, I'm calling it not just for him. I'm calling it for everybody else in the room who is sitting there feeling diminished. Okay. That's what allyship is. I needed to stand up for them and I needed to give it voice. So I know we're getting, okay, go ahead. One more comment.
I did want to say one more time, because then you'll have those times. Somebody wrote something. They said there's death by committee. I took that note too. But sometimes it might be a time where, say, someone is struggling or whatever, and you do stand up in the moment, but the person still marginalizes y'all. Well, let's just move on. Okay. You as an ally may be feeling that moment was wasted. I should have done that. The person you stood up for,
exactly. There's
totally
still
different
value.
way about you.
There's still value.
A lot of times it's not about what benefit you are getting from it, from being the savior of the moment.
Right.
That person felt supported. Were they as supported? Did you all get the outcome that you wanted? Maybe not. But that person felt supported in the moment. And I assure you, your relationship will change with that person.
That's huge. That's huge. All right. I know we're running late. I want to try to get in 2 specific examples, because one of the things, you guys know me, I try to keep it real. I try to keep it practical. We can all read articles on microaggressions and look at lists. I want you to hear from my real experience. I want you to know that I'm a Black woman, 50 years old, who works in the anti-racism space. And these things keep happening to me. Okay. And I'm sorry, but when white people are talking to me about these sorts of things, I assume they're on their best behavior. So when blatant things happen to me, I still get surprised. And I shouldn't say just white people, because it doesn't have to only be white people, but in particular. So number one, I was being interviewed by a journalist. I'm almost certain he's a white man. And he had gotten one of my newsletters, and it was promoting my LinkedIn Learning course, How to Speak Up Against Racism at Work. And so he was going to write an article about that. So he's interviewing me. And during the interview, we started talking about systemic racism. And I cited just one piece of data. There's so many points of data that look at disparate outcomes. And so the one piece of data I was talking about was the fact that there are only 5 Black CEOs in the Fortune 500. And actually, we're up to 5. It used to be 4. And for years, there were no Black women. Fortunately, now we have 2. But as soon as I said that, I said, there are only 5. That's like 1%. It used to be less than 1%. Black Fortune 500 CEOs. Immediately, without skipping a beat, he said, well, I mean, you got to think about qualifications. I mean, that's going to hold them back. I was like a deer in headlights. Like, he is not sitting around in his living room talking to his boys. He is doing an interview with someone who's a workplace anti-racism thought leader and a Black woman. And I just could not believe how he didn't skip a beat. So when you look at that disparate outcome, when you look at the fact that there are only 5 uh, Black Fortune 500 CEOs, there are kind of 2 ways you can process that, or 2 causes. You can either assume that there's something wrong with Black people, and that kind of makes sense, because why would we expect Black people to be CEOs? Or you can assume, wow, there must be something in the water. There is something in the process that is holding down, that is oppressing Black people and not allowing them to progress as well as their white counterparts. And so again, that was just kind of mind-blowing. I didn't skip a beat. This is how I responded. I didn't skip a beat. I said, that is one of the very dangerous myths that we need to work to dispel. There's nothing about Blackness that should make us equate. There's no reason why we should equate Blackness with inferiority. And so we really do have to push back on those biased, racist assumptions.
How did he respond? Like, I'm like, how did he respond?
It's interesting. He did not have a big response. We kind of kept going with so he was like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. So we kind of kept going. And I was kind of the same as you. Like, I wonder what he took from that. Like, I wondered, did that, make an impact on him? And then afterwards, I started kind of analyzing myself and saying, God, how could I have handled it differently? And one of the ways I think I could have handled it differently is going back to on this sheet here, the first one we talked about, was throwing it back in his court. Instead of my responding, throwing back. Well, what do you mean by that? Oh, so why would that be a problem? Or are you thinking, are you feeling?
Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's an interesting way of seeing things.
Yeah. And so with that, I would have kind of volleyed it back to him. And then he would have had to try to justify it, unpack it. So I think that could have been a different way to handle it. What do you guys think? Or I guess here, these are some comments. Okay, let me go to the next one because I know we're running really short on time. I was talking to a company who was planning to bring me in to be a speaker to talk about anti-racism. And trust me, when people, contact me, I mean, I send them to my videos, they kind of know I'm candid. And certainly, when I go in and I'm doing a formal talk, it's different than, I'm not as casual as I am here. And certainly I don't, go into any situation trying to make anyone feel bad or anything like that. But I believe in facts, and I'm going to be pretty clear on, my stance on anti-racism, my strategies, my recommendations, etc. I'm not playing to the audience. I'm not changing up my content to make sure everybody's happy, because I don't think that's ethical, and I don't think that's a way to make real progress. And so we're talking about all these different things with the update with bringing me in, and he's loving it. And he's like, oh, you're great. You're awesome. You're amazing. He said, I can't even bring myself to say it. So he goes, now we're doing a Zoom call. He goes, yeah, you're perfect. He's like, if I wasn't looking at you, if we weren't doing video, I wouldn't even know you were Black. My mind literally did a screech. What? Huh? I mean, literally, the first one I immediately recognized as a microaggression, and I felt kind of offended. The second one, it was such a crazy comment to me that I didn't have time to process it in the moment. It reminds me of, I listen to this French podcast all the time, and my French is good enough that I understand about half of it. So sometimes if I get to a sentence where I don't get the gist of it, and I'm literally trying to translate every word, I'll miss too much. So I have to just mentally catch up and say, well, I'll get that later. And that's kind of what I did with him, where I did not have time to catch it and process it in the moment. And so it wasn't until afterwards, after we got off the call, that I really processed it and thought about it. And I was like, I cannot believe he actually said that. And so that's another situation where in the moment I could have said, when I look back on it, how could I have handled it better? I probably, and I think this would have been great for me to repeat what he said because it sounded so crazy. So, gosh, let me understand. So you're saying if we weren't looking at each other, you wouldn't know I was Black.
He'd be like, well, what did you think I was? Like, that's
Yeah.
my favorite one.
So
Right?
what
Well,
would
what
you
did you
think?
think?
Yeah, what would you think I was? Or help me understand that. I'm not quite connecting the dots. Or is that going to be relevant for the talk? So that's definitely one where we could do that. In my case, actually what I ended up doing was I declined the work. They had met my quote and everything, but I just, declined to work with them. I did not explain why, and I probably should have. I probably should have gone that extra step. And it wasn't just that one comment. There were a few things that didn't set right with me, but
See, they needed you though. They needed
yeah,
you. Right?
I just told them that, this is not going to be a fit. I don't think this is going to be a fit, but I wish you guys, the best. And I want to be perfectly honest with you guys. I don't think I handled them perfectly, and that's okay. That's why we need to dig in. We need to do the work. Doing something is better than doing nothing. And then the next time will be better. Any closing thoughts?
Well, it's just we have all been existing. We're all evolving together. You know what I mean? So I think I mentioned some of this at the last session, is that we as marginalized people, and I'll just say as marginalized people, we've all built up our own walls in how we deal with things. Now it seems like people are like, why is everyone just talking about this all of a sudden? No, it's just, I think because of social media has allowed, and then
No, you guys are talking about all of a sudden.
Right.
We've been
talking about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We don't like being having these things assumed about us. And again, I'll say all marginalized people, because we all have different things, again, baggage that we bring to the table. But we have built up walls that makes it harder. Like, Dana and I are people that like to talk about things. We like to confront issues, but everybody's not like that. So everyone is not receptive to the same type of thing. You have to focus on constantly researching, reading, talking, opening up the conversation, and not being defensive about the fact that you don't know something. It's okay not to know. We don't expect you to know, but we are impressed when you want to do something, and it's about us, not about you getting a gold star.
Yes.
So make it about that. One little anecdote though, I remember I used to always wear my little black Santa Claus. This is back when I used to work in the mall, and I wear my little black Santa Claus during the holidays, and I'd be like, and people are like, that's so cute, a black Santa. I'm like, well, what color is he supposed to be?
Exactly.
And then they'd be like,
I know. It's like
a fictional character, right? Anyway, but right,
yes.
right.
No, but thank you for that. And before, don't jump off, because I got two quick things to tell you guys. The biggest question I get all the time, particularly from allies or white people, or people who are newer to some of this work, is what can I do? And I just want to, bring this point home. There are three ingredients that I think that every organization needs to have these healthy conversations. And unfortunately, most organizations don't have any of them. One, you need racial literacy. Okay. We can have our own opinions, but we can't have our own facts. We've got to be talking about apples and oranges. When you literally do not understand the history of oppression and the history of race and discrimination in this country, it's hard to have a healthy conversation, because we're just at two completely different levels. And it's not just for white people, that's Black people as well. Two huge shout outs. If you're new to this, or if you really want to work on your racial literacy, Netflix has two amazing productions, 13th Amendment and 14th Amendment. Search for those on Netflix. They do a great job of dispelling myths and really explaining the history of race in this country. So you got to have racial literacy, but you've also got to have racial humility. You can't read a couple books and think you know everything, or think you're going to tell me, and when I've got 50 years of lived experience, that systemic racism doesn't exist or whatever it is, or think you really understand everything. I'm still learning. I try to, remain very humble. I called out this woman who had written this article that I thought was very inaccurate and very dangerous. A lot of the things that she was putting into this article, I reached out to her. I said I wanted to speak with her. She was gracious enough to do that. I started asking her some hard questions and her whole demeanor changed. Okay. And I wasn't being mean or nasty, but I was just being very clear and direct. And unfortunately, this goes back to the tone policing. Unfortunately, when Black women are clear and direct, a lot of people don't have any time for that. And so that's perceived very differently. That's a different topic for a different day. Right. And literally, we have been on the phone no more than about 10 minutes. And then she's like, I asked her about her sources, and she didn't have any. And so she's got very huffy, and she was like, well, I'm going to have to go. After this question, I'm just going to have to go. I literally, and I don't recommend this, but I'm just being honest with you guys. I literally started laughing. And I said, I bet you are going to have to go, because it did not shock me. That's what I expect. I expect as soon as there is a clear, direct question, and I'm not kikiing and humming and hawing and, shuffling, I'm being clear and direct. I'm asking you a question. No time for that. So there's no racial humility. They think they know everything because they read 2 books or 3 books. So racial literacy, racial humility, once you have those 2, you build racial stamina. Okay. The racial stamina is what permits you. It's what allows you to stay in the conversation. I wrote an article about this white guy who wrote a book about grappling. He's saying that's what we've got to do. We've got to grapple with these issues. We've got to stop sticking our head in the sand or stop getting overly defensive. So those are the 3 ingredients: racial literacy, humility, and if you put those 2 together, you're going to get stamina. So with that, I'm going to leave you guys with one of my favorite quotes from Margaret Mead. Never, ever doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. So don't diminish your ability to make a difference. I want to say thank you to Karen.
Bye-bye. Thank you for having me again. I appreciate it.
And thank you to everybody. Join us first and third Tuesdays on LinkedIn and YouTube. There will be a recording. You can always catch the recording of all the archive sessions on my YouTube channel. It will post on LinkedIn, but if you go to my YouTube channel, they're always there. So that one is a little bit easier. But I really want to thank you guys. You've been an amazing community. I'm going to be back on September 7th. And I'm doing Ask Me Anything. So whatever you want to ask me, go ahead and post it. Once I create the event, you can go ahead and post it, your question there. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. But looking forward to seeing you guys. You guys were awesome. Thank you so much.